Hello and welcome back to the 100-day art challenge. If this is the first video that you're watching of this challenge, then I'll give you a quick refresher. I have been trying to make a piece of artwork every day for 100 days. That failed after, I don't know, it was 40 or so I think, and on YouTube it failed after 2, but on Instagram I posted about 40 I think, and then I just had to stop because I had other work that was more important, I'm afraid. This type of challenge is for fun and development, but it's certainly not going to earn me much money, so as much as I enjoy things like that, I had to just stop and hold off for a while until I had a break from the jobs that I was doing so that I could start to produce the videos and present them to you now. So they're a little bit late and they're a little bit out of order, but this is going to show you some of the process that goes into making the I suppose the, would you call it the canvas? Well, let's call it the canvas that I use to make my pastel paintings on. It will be the back of a inside of a picture frame which has the dimensions written on the piece of paper. There will on the other side be brown speckled matte surface, and that's what I like to do these images on. Once in a while I will do it on a toilet roll that I cut straight so that it's flattened into a rectangle, but most of the time I like to use this for my picture plane, and this is all that I do. I just measure it, cut it into the shapes that I like, and then start to decide what reference material I want to use. And there can be pictures of people who I know. For example, I've done an image of my dentist and the dental assistant as 2 different videos. I've done people who I watch on YouTube. I've done people who I found on Instagram. There've been all kinds of different portraits that I've tried to utilize for this challenge, and it's not just portraits that I do for this challenge. I do a lot of landscapes as well and still life, so you'll be seeing more of those coming up. I even did one where it was just announcing that I was getting closer to my subscriber kind of milestone of 1,000, and I had about 20 to go. So you can see how I cut the smaller shapes there. So I have a really small square, and then I have some longer rectangles that I'm going to cut into squares so that I can do little portraits. And up to now, the smallest that I've done is on a toilet roll that's been cut straight. When I say cut straight, I just mean straight along the actual tube, so that when I flatten it, it's a rectangle. That's the smallest one that I've shown so far. This is now going to show the smallest that I've been drawing portraits for this challenge up to now anyway. And at the moment I am about just under 60 submissions in, I think I am. I don't know, I've lost count because I've just been doing other things. So I certainly haven't been doing anything much or any smaller than this so far, not for this challenge anyway. So this is just showing you how I prepare some of that, and the other things in this challenge will be coming up soon. I'm trying to break up all of these oil pastel portraits with a few other mixed media pieces and different mediums, like oil paints will be coming up soon. I do some soft pastel paintings which are for an exhibition that I've had on for most of this year at a place called Trefnant Inn. Trefnant is a lovely small village in North Wales, so I've been trying to make bits and pieces for that location because it was a place where a friend of mine called Petra and I exhibited our collaborative work. We did a project on farming and agriculture last year, and our exhibitions were from September until December, and then the December exhibition was at Trefnant Inn. But in September we did an exhibition in Carnarvon, a place called Carn, and I think I had 6 exhibitions last year, and my intention was to maintain that or build on it, but instead I've cut that down to 2 places I think where I exhibit this year. I had a 3rd place that I did exhibit, and I left there I had another place that I started exhibiting at and I've left there as well. So that's all stories I might tell at another date. But for now, let's go back into this portrait. I always start with an ink drawing. It's very scribbly and sketchy, and I don't normally draw like this, but for these portraits for this challenge, for some reason I always have these little feathered scratch marks. I don't know why. This is someone who I watch on YouTube. Anyone who doesn't know the expression Fergle, Mergle, sorry, I said it wrong, I never normally say this wrong, Fergle, Burgle, Menergle, Burgle. This is an expression made by this chap here called Matt Dillahunty, and it's a great expression, it's very funny, and I don't think he uses it anymore, but all of the people who are aware of that expression and where it came from often send him super chats, which is where you pay to make a comment on a live show, and will often say Fergle, Burgle, Menergle, Burgle and some message attached to it. And yeah, it's become a bit of an inside joke, and I think he started to do merchandise for it because it is, I don't know, it becomes symbolic of a larger point that's trying to be made in these online discussions that he holds. For this portrait, because it's so small, part of the task for me is fitting it on the surface. It's a mistake that I've often made, is to start drawing and not to measure. So I advise to not do this. But I get lucky on this occasion. He does fit on the surface, and I think in quite an interesting composition. Normally what I try to do for these portraits is to measure around the subject's head the negative space around them, because that will usually show me some indication of how they sit comfortably on the surface. But on this occasion I don't think I've done that, because the way that he sits is quite low, and I think I just get very lucky, because at this point it looks as though he's not going to fit on the surface, because he does have a fairly long beard, and he looks a bit Father Christmas like in this picture if anything, because he's even wearing a red top, and with a big white beard and a red top you can only associate that with Father Christmas really. But here we are. Sometimes I don't draw as many details as I am here, and other times I draw far more details than I am in this picture, but I think it depends on how confident I am that I'm going to be able to show this person in a fairly clear description, and if I'm not confident about that, then I'll try to get a lot of subtle details, because I think if I want to include them in the pastel painting side of this piece, then I need to sketch them out in pen first, otherwise I might forget and it might become blurry or muddy at a later stage. So it's now a case of mapping out what I think is important landmarks on the face, and to try to preserve those before things become chaotic with a lot of very rich colour. He does have this beard, which is, he's been growing for quite a while now. Other times he's been clean shaven in his life, but this is quite a I don't know, an iconic look that he's held for quite a while. And as you can see, it goes even out of the frame, which is again not the best framing necessarily, but I quite like the composition of this piece, so I'm a bit conflicted on whether or not I think he should have been set higher in the frame. I think it's quite an interesting piece, even though the bottom of his beard is cut off. But there we are. That is the sketch of Matt Dillahunty. I think it's all the information that I need in order to build on this with some colour and to try to get the tonal values in there. But the challenge is, how much can I do on such a small portrait, and how much will be lost because I don't have that surface area. I'm using a fairly dark red to start off with. That's not unusual. I normally do now get used to adding a dark colour first and then blending into that with lighter colours. One thing I am doing that I think is a mistake is going quite light and scrubbing it on lightly instead of really pushing down and pressing on some tone in a darker way, because that is how I think I can apply these colours more successfully, is to get a lot on quick and then to blend into that thicker colour. But I'm being a bit hesitant, and I'm also going from the skin straight into his clothing, which is really unusual. If you've watched any of these videos before, you will know that I never do this. I never put in the colour of the clothing until the skin is completely done, and I've done parts of the hair and he's pretty much finished. Then I start to go to the clothing, so this is a bit out of sequence, and I think it's possibly just concern that I am not going to make a successful piece because of how small it is, but I could be wrong. It's a while ago when I made these. As I said, they're a bit out of order and they're quite a bit later than when they were actually made, but there we are. The main focus though is to try to do this process where I add a darker colour first and then blend into it with lighter colours to try to show the texture of the skin. And for this, I think that if you look at where I've put the shadow, it looks as though the light is coming from the outside, as if it's from behind, as opposed to, it looks like he's got shadow in on his forehead and on his cheeks. This can be quite interesting as a way to describe the light on someone's face. So I start blending into that first darker colour with a medium pink. Normally the first colour I put down is thicker, as I said, and the reason is the blending will be much more effective that way. But the interesting part of this portrait is that this is an online personality. This is someone who has a YouTube channel and they do live streams, which means that a lot of the time when that's the case, the streamer will be sat in front of a green screen and behind them they'll have projected some other background, and that's the case with this portrait. So I think one of the interesting aspects of this portrait is that the reflected light on the subject is green, and that's what I'm capturing here, is that even though his background isn't green when you watch the video, what you see on him reflected is the light bouncing off the background and reflecting on his skin. And because he has a bald head or a shaved head, it's green, and you can see that it's green. So I'm getting a white here to see if I can it's a blue, I think it is, or a grey, and seeing if I can do a bit of a transition, but it's tonally equivalent with the background. And I think at the time I don't know this, so I'm trying to add colour, and because it's such a muted colour, it's not really adding much, and it's also, you can't really distinguish that grey from the brown of the background. That's when something is tonally equivalent. Everything else that I've added onto the surface so far is tonally darker than the background. I initially thought I would be doing white on top. That would have been a better decision, but I think that must come later. The only tactical reason to add a grey to the beard so heavily as I've done there is so that I can add white in order to blend the white with the grey and have quite a painterly effect. And you'll see parts of this now with adding white to the forehead. It will have that effect to blend in with the deep pink and the red beneath it to try to show the light that's shining off the monitors that will be in front of Matt whilst he's live streaming. But to have that green on the head it's normally seen as an unnatural colour, but I think it adds character to this portrait because of who the person is. It gives their environment a dimension, an extra dimension to this character, really, to who we're looking at and who we're considering. Because the picture's so small, you're going to miss parts of what I'm doing because my hand just completely covers the surface, so I apologise for that. In hindsight, I would have set up the camera and paused the process here and set up the camera on my desk looking across that you could see it from a different angle. But when you're making a piece like this, especially such a small piece, you become so immersed with the importance of trying to achieve something somewhat successful that I just didn't even notice what vantage point the viewers have at this stage of the piece. But thankfully I keep removing my hand so that you can see what I've done is just try to lighten aspects of the pink of the face and the skin in certain strategic areas, and now I'm going back in with a darker colour here with the red that I initially started with to add some shadow areas around the eyes and building up on the light and shadow description that I use to create portraits, to explain what happens on the face under certain light conditions. But I'm blending that again with the pink, so the shadow goes in and then it gets taken away, and it's a bit of a push and pull portrait so far, but this is why it's important to experiment with things like this, because you can't always predict what's going to happen, so you have to be open to the different epiphanies that may occur in making pieces that are so small or limited in certain ways. And I have tried to challenge myself throughout this process of doing a 100 day of art making in different ways. I made a piece where instead of blending the colours, I really limited the palette to 4 colours, and there would be one for the mid-tone shadow for the face, one for dark shadow on the hair, and then 2 for the clothing, one showing the light of the clothing and one showing the shadow. And that was it. And I think that's the experimentation which is interesting and successful with this challenge, is that you have to try to develop and move in certain ways in order to keep your interest, kind of the momentum of your interest going. And it's the same with changing the scale. Full disclosure, my older brother advised me to start making oil pastel portraits larger because I wasn't getting enough detail in the pieces, and I quite like how vague they became when I didn't put as much detail in. So instinctively I rebelled against that good advice that he was giving me and made them smaller, not because I think he was wrong, but because I thought, I wonder what happens if you go smaller instead, because I like the less specific, less detailed portraits. Perhaps I'll capture that if I go much smaller. But it turns out I tried to go much smaller with my marks, and I tried to make the same observations apparent on the portrait as I would do if it were larger as well, making certain parts loose and painterly and other parts very fiddly and specific to try to heighten the contrast and the contours of the face to show that there is a person in there. And I already quite like what's happening here. I've put the white on the beard to sit on top of the grey, and it is mark making at that point. It looks almost like hatching, and using black to try to describe the glasses and the eyebrows, I have to be very careful to not go too dark too quickly. And as always, the black and the white have worn down the fastest, so I have to be very careful with how I use those. And there's a space for a touch more green just on the edge, and again that is reflecting from behind him and probably bouncing off the monitor, I'm not sure, but the fact that it does reflect in such a way makes this portrait, I think, glow uniquely compared to others which are photographed in different places. For example, my dentists were photographed in their surgery, and photographs that I used from Instagram were taken from a state fair, and that was by the account Earth's World, which I advertise on those videos and I link in the description of those videos. Whereas for this is a screenshot that I've taken of a live stream, so that's why you have this interesting green glow around this person, which just wouldn't happen in natural circumstances. You'd have to be in somewhere which either had some kind of arcade lighting or a fairground of some kind, where there's perhaps out somewhere where there's neon lighting. But on this occasion it will be a dark room with monitors that are the light source for the subject, and the green screen behind, creating this interesting glow behind them. And I just appreciate the difference. Using white here to indicate the light on the clothing, and that reads as pink because the dark red was initially laid down early on. To put the white on top of that now, it doesn't look white, it just sits on top in a blended fashion, which is a really nice feature of blending with oil pastels, is that you don't get pure colour sat opaque on top of each other. there is a blending and a transparency to them, which is why certain techniques and methodologies can appear to be more successful, in my opinion anyway. I quite like the effect of what can be achieved if you use them in these types of specific ways. And now it's just a case of adding little touches here and there, just little pieces of features, just the corners of the nose and touches underneath the moustache and parts of the beard. And I think it's quite a nice minimalist approach to describing a human being. There's just enough there to see all of the features on his face, the concentration that he has on the different points that are being made. The conversation he's engaged in online will be a serious philosophical debate that he is taking with complete sincerity. So it's a different frame of mind than what I normally try to depict in these portraits. For example, my dentist was just posing for the photograph very kindly of her, and the people at the state fair will be just engaged in a social gathering, whereas this person is having a deep philosophical discussion with someone, and they are trying to consider how to communicate with their interlocutor in the most effective way so that there's benefit for not only the person on the other end of the line, but also the people who are watching the video live and people who will watch it long after it's aired live, because they are very valuable discussions and entertaining in my experience anyway. It depends what you're into, but I really like it. The show that he is on is actually called The Line, and as I said, he's called Matt Dillahunty. He came up with the expression Fergle, Burgle, Menergle, Burgle on a whim whilst trying to make a point to someone about what truth is. When you make oil pastels like this, you'll often find bits of crumbs and flakes on the side, so that's why I'm just trying to gather up and put on the surface, because when I get to a certain stage of the portrait where I think it's looking quite nicely described, I take it away briefly. I then brush them all off into the bin so that the crumbs and the flakes don't distort further any of the marks that I've made for the portrait, and I try to show it clean, so that is what it looks like. And very often after I've done that, I will notice one or two extra marks that I'd like to make on there, which I may have missed. Now you can see there are touches of purple there as well, which I think is quite a nice colour to include because of the green at the top shining on the edge, just to show a sense of scale. There's the fine liner that I used right at the beginning next to him. So there he is. Fergle, Burgle, Menergle, Burgle. Thanks for watching. I'll see you tomorrow.